A hard drive recovered from a junk store after 13 years reveals a chilling last video. The ghost's name was Leo, but before he was a ghost, he was a supernova. He was a 7-year-old boy with a galaxy of freckles splattered across his nose, and a laugh that could shatter glass and mend broken hearts in the same breath. His hair was the color of wheat fields in late summer, and his eyes were the impossible, bottomless blue of a deep mountain lake. To his father, Daniel, he was the center of the universe. To his mother, Chloe, he was the anchor that kept her tethered to the world. He was a collector of rocks, a teller of magnificently impossible stories, and a firm believer that chocolate chip cookies were a viable breakfast food. He was a whirlwind of skinned knees, grass stains, and untied shoelaces. He wasn't a victim. He was a boy, and his absence had left a crater so immense that 13 years of debris had failed to fill it. Daniel was a cartographer of grief. In the years after Leo vanished, he had mapped every inch of his own sorrow. He knew the barren plains of numbness, the jagged peaks of rage, the suffocating swamps of despair. He was a man who had been hollowed out, the vibrant core of his being, methodically scooped away, leaving only a brittle shell. Before, he had been an architect, a creator of solid, tangible things. He built homes with strong foundations and soaring ceilings. After, he was a custodian of emptiness. He quit his job, unable to bear the irony of building new family homes when his own had been demolished. He now worked nights, cleaning office buildings, a silent phantom polishing surfaces that would be dirtied again by morning. It was a penance, a way to move through the world without having to truly engage with it. He and Chloe still lived in the same house, a shrine to a life that no longer existed. Leo's room remained untouched, a perfect, heartbreaking diorama of a childhood interrupted. The dinosaur wallpaper, the model rockets hanging from the ceiling, the Lego creations frozen mid-construction on the floor. It was a museum of what-ifs, and Daniel was its lonely, nocturnal curator. Chloe had chosen a different path. While Daniel had imploded, she had ossified. She'd encased her grief in a hard, polished shell of functionality. She went back to work. As a legal secretary, a month after Leo disappeared, her co-workers marveling at her strength, never seeing the fine network of cracks just beneath the surface. She organized fundraisers for missing children. She volunteered. She chaired committees. She poured all the ferocious energy of her motherhood into causes, into abstractions, into anything that wasn't the gaping, screaming hole in her own life. She and Daniel moved around each other like celestial bodies caught in a dead star's orbit, held together by the gravity of their shared loss, but never truly touching. Their conversations were logistical bills, groceries, car maintenance. The silence between them was a chasm filled with everything they couldn't say. With the name, they couldn't bring themselves to speak. They were two people drowning in the same ocean, refusing to acknowledge that the other was also struggling for air. The antagonist, the man in the dark coat, had a name. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the smile, that predatory knowing flash of white teeth, was a brand on his memory. This man was not a phantom. He was a craftsman of cruelty. He moved through the world with a chilling, frictionless grace, his actions leaving no trace, no ripples, only devastation in his wake. His past was a carefully curated fiction, a series of identities and histories assembled and disassembled with the ease of a stage magician changing props. He was a creature of the city's hidden currents, a predator who hunted in the liminal spaces where civic order frayed. He wasn't driven by mania or impulse. He was driven by a cold, calculating ideology of power. He believed in a natural order, a world divided into shepherds and sheep, and he was a shepherd. He culled the flock, not for sustenance, but for sport, for the exquisite, godlike thrill of exercising absolute control over another's destiny. His victims were not random. They were chosen. They were symbols. They were the beloved, the cherished, the irreplaceable centers of someone else's universe, because the truest expression of power wasn't just to take a life, but to shatter a world. And in the fall of 2011, he had set his sights on the world of Daniel and Chloe. He had seen the radiant, unconditional love they had for their son, and he had wanted to extinguish it. And then there was the hidden witness, Michael Daniels. Younger brother. Michael was a man caught in the gears of a machine he had helped to build. He was the vice president of Aegis Global Security, a company that presented itself as a high-end corporate protection firm but operated in the gray zones of espionage, sabotage, and extra-legal enforcement. He had always lived in Daniel's shadow, athletic, less popular, less of the golden boy his older brother had been. He'd compensated by pursuing a different kind of power, a power that was quiet, institutional, and absolute. He was sharp, ambitious, and morally flexible, qualities that had allowed him to rise quickly through the ranks at Aegis. He wore tailored suits that cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage payment and lived in a sterile glass and steel condo downtown that overlooked the entire city, a king in his sterile, lonely castle. The bond between the brothers, once a boisterous, easy camaraderie, had been another casualty of Leo's disappearance. Daniel had retreated into his grief, and Michael had retreated into his guilt, because Michael knew, not everything, not at first, but he knew enough. The scene, 13 years ago, played out in Michael's mind every single day, a private, recurring horror film. It was 2 days after Leo had vanished. The police were still calling it a search, but the hope was already curdling into something foul. Daniel was a walking ghost, his eyes vacant, his movements robotic. Chloe was a statue of silent, screaming agony. Michael, desperate to do something, anything, had gone to his boss, the founder and CEO of Aegis, a man named Alistair Finch. Finch was a charismatic, silver-haired patrician, with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, and eyes as cold as a morgue slab. He was a mentor to Michael, the father figure he'd always craved. Michael had sat in Finch's expansive office, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. "Alistair, I need a favor, a personal one. My nephew, he's missing." Finch had listened with a practiced, paternal sympathy. He steepled his fingers, his expression a mask of grave concern. "Michael, my boy. I am so sorry." "Of course, anything. What can we do? We have resources the police can only dream of. Facial recognition, network tracking, assets on the ground. We'll find him." Relief, profound and overwhelming, had washed over Michael. He'd given Finch a photo of Leo, a school picture where he was missing a front tooth and grinning like a pirate. He'd given him the details of the park, the time, everything. Finch had clapped him on the shoulder. "Go be with your brother," he'd said. "Let us handle this." 2 days later, Finch had summoned him back. The mood in the office was different, colder, more formal. "We found something," Finch said, his voice flat. He didn't look at Michael. He stared out the window at the city below. "You found him?" Michael's heart leaped. "Is he okay?" Finch turned, and the paternal mask was gone. In its place was the cold, pragmatic face of a CEO assessing a liability. "We found a loose end, a potential complication for a client." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A very important client." Client? Michael was confused. What does a client have to do with Leo? Finch finally met his eyes. The coldness in his gaze was absolute. The situation at the park, it was an operation. Not one of ours, officially. But it was undertaken by an associate on behalf of a client who required a sensitive extraction. The room seemed to tilt. The words didn't make sense. Operation client, extraction. These were the sterile, bloodless euphemisms of their trade. They had nothing to do with a 7-year-old boy on a swing set. "I don't understand," Michael whispered, his throat suddenly dry. "Your nephew, unfortunately, was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Finch continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He saw something he shouldn't have. The operative made a field decision to contain the situation. It was regrettable, but clean." Clean. The word hung in the air, obscene and monstrous. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. He saw Leo's grin, the gap where his front tooth should have been. He felt the phantom weight of his nephew on his shoulders. "What are you saying?" Michael's voice was trembling. "Where is he?" "He's gone, Michael," Finch said, his tone final, and he's not coming back. The operative was a professional. There's nothing to find. No body, no evidence. Nothing that can ever be traced back to the client, or to us. He walked over to his desk and picked up a silver hard drive. The Western Digital brick. Our tech team retrieved this from the operative. It's your brother's, I believe. The camera's memory card was backed up to it automatically via a wireless hub in his car. The operative was sloppy. He should have destroyed this. Finch slid the hard drive across the polished mahogany desk. It stopped inches from Michael's hand. This is a problem, Michael. This video contains audio of our associate interacting with your brother. It places him at the scene. It's a thread that, if pulled, could unravel a great many things. Things that could be catastrophic for our client, and, by extension, for this company. For you. The unspoken threat was a physical force, pressing down on him, suffocating him, his career, his future, his life. All of it was tied to Aegis, to Finch. What do you want me to do? Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Your brother is in no state to be dealing with this, Finch said smoothly. The paternal mask slipping back on. It would break him. It's an act of mercy, really. Take the drive. Tell him you'll get rid of it. Tell him it's better not to have the reminders. He'll thank you for it. And then, you will make this problem disappear permanently. And so Michael, the hidden witness, had made his choice. He had chosen fear over family, ambition over justice. He took the hard drive. He went to his brother's house, a house thick with the stench of grief and police presence. He saw the empty look in Daniel's eyes, the raw, gaping wound where his heart used to be, and he lied. He took the silver brick, the digital tombstone of his own nephew, and promised to destroy it. But he couldn't. He took it home to his sterile apartment in the sky, and, in a fit of self-loathing and morbid curiosity, he'd plugged it in. He'd watched the video. He'd heard the friendly voice of the monster who had stolen his nephew. He'd heard his own brother's oblivious replies. He'd heard the squeak of the swings stop. He'd heard the scraping of the wood chips. And in a moment of cowardice and a strange, desperate hope for some future, undiscovered absolution, he hadn't destroyed it. He'd renamed one file. A single, desperate act of defiance against the monster he worked for and the coward he had become. He'd changed the innocuous file name to Leo_last_day.mp4. He told himself it was a marker, a sign, that if the drive was ever found, if Daniel ever saw it, he would know it wasn't an accident. It was the smallest, most pathetic act of rebellion he could manage. Then he'd taken the drive, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and buried it deep within a box of old college textbooks and electronics. A few months later, during a move, that box, along with others, had been donated to a thrift store by a moving company in a logistical mix-up. Michael, discovering the mistake too late, had been simultaneously terrified and relieved. The evidence was gone, lost in the city's vast river of discarded things. The secret was safe. His betrayal was buried. Until, 13 years later, a man hollowed out by grief bought a $20 piece of junk and unearthed a ghost, and the machine Michael had sold his soul to was about to come for him. The hidden witness, who had spent 13 years in a prison of his own making, was about to be dragged into the light. And the confrontation between two brothers, one broken by loss and the other by guilt, was finally, terrifyingly, inevitable. The secrets were stirring, and the rain was coming. The first call Daniel made was not to the police. The police had failed him once. They had been polite, sympathetic, and utterly useless. They had patted his shoulder and fed him platitudes while the monster who stole his son walked away, leaving nothing but a void. No, Daniel's first call was to his brother. He stabbed at the numbers on his phone with a shaking finger. The familiar sequence of Michael's direct line feeling alien and treacherous. It was 3 a.m, but he didn't care. The world had been reset. Time was meaningless. Michael answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. Daniel, what's wrong? Is it Chloe? I found it, Mikey. Daniel's voice was a raw, guttural rasp. He was standing in his garage, the hard drive sitting on the workbench in front of him. A silver idol in the harsh glare of the overhead fluorescent light. Found what? Dan, you're not making any sense. What are you talking about? The hard drive, Daniel said, the words tasting like poison and deliverance. The one you were supposed to destroy. I found it. In a goddamn junk store. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was not a sleepy silence. It was a sharp, sudden vacuum. The sound of a man's entire world holding its breath. Daniel could hear it. The silent, frantic spinning of gears in his brother's mind. I don't know what you mean, Michael finally stammered, his voice a pitch higher than usual. The lie was flimsy, pathetic, don't you, Mikey? Daniel's voice dripped with a venom he hadn't known he possessed. Don't you lie to me, not anymore. I saw the video. The last one, the one you renamed. The silence this time was longer, heavier. Daniel could picture his brother in his sterile, multi-million-dollar apartment, sitting bolt upright in his $1,000 sheets, the blood draining from his face. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was a choked whisper. Oh God, Daniel. Why, Michael? Daniel's voice cracked, the rage momentarily giving way to the raw, desolate pain. That had been his constant companion for 13 years. Why did you keep it? Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't, Michael croaked. You have to understand, I couldn't. Understand what? That you let me believe he just wandered off. That you let us live in this hell, this limbo. For 13 years, thinking it was some tragic, random act of God. I heard him, Michael. I heard the man who took him. He was standing right next to me. The horror of it washed over him again, fresh and nauseating. He worked for your company. I saw the logo, Aegis. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a confession. The sound of the last wall of denial. Crumbling to dust, we need to meet, Michael said, his voice suddenly firm, laced with a new and unfamiliar urgency. The sleepy confusion was gone, replaced by the cold, clipped tone of a man facing a crisis. Not at your house, not at mine, somewhere public, but quiet. Do you know that little diner off the old highway? The one that's open all night? I know it. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Michael said. Don't talk to anyone. Don't call anyone. Especially not the police. Do you understand? Me, Daniel, this is bigger than you can possibly imagine. You have no idea what you've found. The line went dead. Daniel stood in the silence of the garage, the phone still pressed to his ear. Michael's fear was a tangible thing, a cold electric current that had traveled through the phone and into his own nervous system. This was more than a guilty conscience. This was terror. His brother wasn't just hiding a secret, he was running. From it, the injustice, which had been a formless atmospheric pressure for 13 years, now had a shape. It had a name, Aegis. It had a face, a predatory smile seared into his memory. And it had his brother tangled in its web. The conflict was no longer a passive state of grief. It was an active, escalating war. And Daniel, the hollowed-out custodian of emptiness, had just been handed a weapon, a $20 silver brick that held the key to everything. He grabbed the hard drive from the workbench, wrapped it carefully in an old t-shirt, and walked out of the garage, leaving the ghosts of his son's childhood behind him. For the first time in 13 years, he wasn't looking back. He was looking forward. Towards a reckoning. The diner was a relic, a capsule of greasy spoon, nostalgia stranded on a stretch of highway that time had forgotten. The neon sign fizzed and sputtered, casting a sickly pink glow over the damp parking lot. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried bacon. Michael was already there, tucked into a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. He looked terrible. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and his expensive silk pajamas were peeking out from under a hastily thrown-on jacket. He was nursing a cup of coffee, his hands wrapped around it, as if for warmth. Though the diner was uncomfortably stuffy, Daniel slid into the booth opposite him, placing the cloth-wrapped hard drive on the cracked vinyl seat beside him. He didn't say a word. He just stared at his brother, the man he had grown up with, The man who had shared his secrets, his triumphs, his deepest sorrows, and who had, for 13 years, been living a lie that had shattered Daniel's world. You brought it, Michael said, his eyes darting to the bundle on the seat. It wasn't a question. You told me not to talk to anyone, Daniel said, his voice flat and cold. You didn't say anything about bringing the goddamn evidence of my son's murder. Michael flinched at the word murder. It's not that simple, Dan, isn't it? Daniel leaned forward, his hands flat on the sticky tabletop. A man took my son, my 7-year-old boy. He took him from a park in broad daylight while I was 10 feet away with my back turned, and you knew. You had proof. That seems pretty goddamn simple to me. You don't understand the people we're dealing with, Michael said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the empty diner. The only other occupants were a trucker hunched over the counter and a waitress with tired eyes who was studiously ignoring them. The man on that recording, he's not just some random kidnapper, he's an asset. He works for, or with, a client of Aegis. A client with unlimited resources and zero morality. A client, Daniel repeated the word, the taste of it, like ash in his mouth. My son is dead because of a client. I don't know if he's dead, Michael said quickly, and for the first time. A flicker of something other than fear appeared in his eyes. A desperate, fragile hope. They never said. The word they used was extracted. Contained. They are pragmatic people. A body is evidence. A living person, hidden away. They can be controlled. The thought was both a new, exquisite torture and a tiny, insane sliver of light in the absolute darkness. Leo, alive. After all this time, Daniel's mind recoiled from the possibility. It was too cruel to even contemplate. Hope was a luxury. He had given up long ago. Who Michael? Daniel's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Who is the client? Who is the man in the video? Michael shook his head, running a hand through his already messy hair. I don't know his name. The operatives Aegis uses, the real high-level ones, they're ghosts. They don't have names. They have designations. As for the client, I was never told. That's not how it works. It's all compartmentalized, need to know. All I know is that they are powerful enough that Alistair Finch himself would cover up a murder to keep them happy. Alistair Finch. The charismatic, paternal CEO of Aegis. The man who had personally promised Michael he would find Leo. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. So you chose them, Daniel said, his voice laced with a quiet, devastating clarity. You chose your job, your money, your goddamn mentor. Over Leo, over me. The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and glittering as broken glass. Michael's face crumpled. The slick corporate vice president vanished, and for a moment, he was just a little brother, caught and terrified. Yes, he whispered, the confession raw and agonizing. I was scared, Dan, you have to believe me. Finch laid it all out for me. The video was a threat, to the company, to me. He said going to the police was useless, that these people had connections everywhere. He said it would be signing my own death warrant, and he said it would destroy you. To know that Leo was gone, not by accident, but by design, and that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, we could do about it. He called it a mercy. A mercy, Daniel spat the word. He let my wife and I live in a hell of not knowing for 13 years, and called it a mercy. And you went along with it. I was a coward, Michael said, his eyes finally meeting Daniel's. They were shining with unshed tears. I was a goddamn coward, and I have lived with that every single day since. Every time I saw you, every time I saw Chloe, it was like a knife in my gut. I hated myself. I still do. The confession, as raw as it was, did little to soothe the raging inferno inside Daniel. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too old. He looked at his brother, this stranger in a familiar body, and felt a cold, hard resolve solidifying in his chest. The grief was still there, a vast, black ocean. But now, something else was rising from its depths. A purpose. Give me a name. Michael, Daniel said, his voice steady and low. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. I want a name. You said you didn't know the operative or the client, but you know someone. You know Finch. And there has to be someone else, someone who knows the details. A loose thread. Give me a name. Michael hesitated, his mind clearly racing, weighing the risks, calculating the odds. He was still the corporate strategist, even in his moment of ruin. He was assessing the board, trying to find a move that wouldn't result in immediate checkmate. There's a man, he said finally, his voice barely audible. His name is Arthur Kendrick. He's retired now. He used to be Finch's right-hand man. Head of operations. He was the one who managed the assets, the ghosts. He was the gatekeeper. Finch forced him out a few years ago. There was bad blood. If anyone knows the operational details of what happened that day, it would be him. Arthur Kendrick. A name, a thread. It was the first solid thing Daniel had been able to grasp in 13 years. Where do I find him? Daniel asked. You don't, Michael said, shaking his head vehemently. You don't find him, Daniel. He finds you. The man is a paranoid recluse. He lives completely off the grid, but he has a weakness, a pressure point. Michael reached into his jacket, pulled out a pen, and scribbled an address on a napkin. This is a rare bookshop in the Old Quarter. Kendrick is a collector, obsessed with first editions of espionage novels. The owner is a man named Elias. Kendrick trusts him. It's the only way to get a message to him. He pushed the napkin across the table. Daniel looked at the address, then back at his brother. He saw the fear in Michael's eyes, but he also saw something else now, a desperate, yearning plea for redemption. Michael had made his choice 13 years ago. Now he was making another one. He was betraying the monster he had sworn allegiance to, in the faint, desperate hope that it might somehow balance the scales. What do I tell this Elias? Daniel asked, pocketing the napkin. Tell him, you have something that belonged to a man named Orion, Michael said. That was Kendrick's operational call sign, and tell him you want to trade it for a ghost. The words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. A trade. A piece of his past for a piece of theirs. He picked up the hard drive, the weight of it feeling immense, biblical. It was a stone tablet, containing a new and terrible commandment. Thou shalt have justice. As he stood up to leave, Michael's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. Daniel, wait. His eyes were wide with terror. You have to be careful. You're not just picking a fight with a man, you're picking a fight with a machine. Finch, Aegis. They will not hesitate. They will crush you. They will destroy everything you have left. They will come after Chloe. The mention of his wife's name was like a physical blow. The thought of dragging her into this, of shattering the fragile peace she had built for herself, was horrifying. But the alternative, to let the truth remain buried, to let the monster with the predatory smile continue to walk the earth, to let Leo's memory be nothing more than a tragic, unsolved footnote, was unthinkable. Let them come, Daniel said, his voice a cold, hard whisper that didn't sound like his own. He pulled his wrist free from his brother's grasp. They took my world from me 13 years ago. I've been living in the rubble ever since. I have nothing left to lose. He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving his brother sitting alone in the flickering neon glow. He didn't look back. The sun was just beginning to rise, a faint gray line on the horizon. It was the dawn of a new day. The first day of the war. The escalation was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping rot, like damp spreading through the walls of his house. The first sign was subtle. A black sedan, a Lincoln Town car with tinted windows, parked across the street from his house. It was there when he left for the bookshop in the morning, and was still there when he returned that evening. It never moved. No one got in or out. It was just there. A silent, inanimate sentinel, a declaration of presence. They knew. Michael's call had been tracked. His meeting with Daniel had been noted. The machine was aware. It was watching him. The bookshop was a dusty, labyrinthine haven called The Last Word. It smelled of decaying paper and old leather. The owner, Elias, was a small, bird-like man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. When Daniel delivered Michael's message, Elias's face betrayed nothing. He simply nodded, took the slip of paper Daniel had written his own burner phone number on, and said, "If Mr. Kendrick is interested, he knows how to reach out." The opaque, clandestine nature of it all felt absurd, like something out of one of the spy novels that lined the shelves. But the black sedan parked outside his house told him this was not a game. For 3 days, there was nothing. The sedan remained. Daniel's life continued in a state of suspended animation. He went to his night job, cleaning the empty, soulless offices of a downtown law firm. He moved through his house like a ghost, watching Chloe as she slept, the burden of his secret, a physical weight on his chest. He would stand in the doorway of Leo's room, the hard drive in his hand, and whisper to the empty space, "I'm coming, buddy, I'm going to find out." He was terrified. But underneath the terror was a core of cold, unyielding rage that was more potent than any fear. He had been a passive victim for 13 years. Now, he was an active threat. And the shift in his own identity was as seismic as the revelation itself. On the 4th night, the burner phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this the archivist?" The voice on the other end was raspy, dry as autumn leaves. It was the voice of an old man. "I might be," Daniel replied, his heart pounding. "It depends on who's asking." "This is the librarian," the voice said. "I'm told you have an overdue item in your possession. Something from the Orion collection." The coded language was back. "I have it," Daniel said. "I want to trade it." "For what?" "A ghost." Daniel said, repeating Michael's strange phrase, "I need the name of the ghost who haunted a park in November. Dois mil e onze." There was a long silence on the other end. Daniel could hear the old man breathing. "That's a very old story," the man Kendrick finally said. "A story with a bad ending. Some books are better left on the shelf. This one isn't," Daniel said, his voice firm. "The ending was never written. I'm going to write it." Another pause. "The item you possess, it's dangerous, it's a key, and the lock it opens is on a cage with a monster inside. Are you sure you want to open that cage?" "The monster has been running free for 13 years, Daniel said. "It's time to put him back in his cage. Or in the ground. I don't really care which." The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I see. You have a personal stake in this. That makes you either very dangerous or very stupid. Let's find out which one it is." He gave Daniel an address. A derelict warehouse by the old shipyard, midnight. "Come alone," Kendrick warned, "and bring the key. If I smell Finch or his people anywhere near you, this conversation is over. And you will not enjoy what comes next." The line went dead. The threat was clear. Kendrick was just as afraid of Finch as Michael was, but his fear was tempered by something else. Malice. The bad blood Michael had mentioned was a potent motivator. Kendrick didn't want to help Daniel out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted to help him because he saw him as a weapon, a missile he could aim at the man who had cast him out. The betrayal came from a direction Daniel never expected. It came from Chloe. He had tried to shield her. He had carried the terrible weight of the video and his meeting with Michael alone, believing he was protecting her. But Chloe was not a fragile thing to be protected. She was a woman who had survived the unsurvivable, and her senses were honed to a razor's edge. She had noticed the change in him. The sleepless nights. The furtive whispers on a new, unfamiliar phone. The way he looked at her, as if from a great distance. And she had noticed the black car. The night he was to meet Kendrick, she confronted him. He was in the garage, preparing to leave. The hard drive was in a small backpack. "Where are you going, Daniel?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. She was standing by the door to the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of worry and suspicion. "Just out for a drive," he lied, and the word tasted like sand in his mouth. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not now. I know something is wrong. There's a car that's been watching our house for days. You have a new phone. You look like you haven't slept in a week. You're scaring me, Daniel. What is going on?" He looked at her, at the woman who had shared his life, his love, his grief. The lie died in his throat. He couldn't do it. He couldn't treat her like a child. He owed her the truth. All of it, so he told her. He sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where Leo used to eat his breakfast. And he told her about the junk store, the hard drive, the video. He described the man's voice, the squeak of the swings stopping, the sound of the wood chips. He watched as her face, already so practiced in grief, seemed to shadow all over again. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a translucent, waxy white. Her hands, resting on the table, began to tremble. Then he told her about Michael, about the lie, about Aegis, about Alistair Finch, about the meeting in the diner, about the phone call with Kendrick. With every word, he felt like he was flaying her, stripping away the scar tissue she had so carefully cultivated over 13 years to reveal the raw, screaming wound beneath. When he finished, there was a long, terrible silence. Chloe stared at the tabletop, her expression unreadable. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just sat there, perfectly still, as if the slightest movement would cause her to disintegrate. "Let me see it," she finally whispered, her voice a reedy, unfamiliar sound. "Chloe, I don't think that's a good idea," he began. "Let me see it," she repeated, her voice stronger now, harder. She lifted her head, and her eyes met his. The pain was there, a deep, fathomless ocean of it. But there was something else in her eyes too. Something he hadn't seen in a very long time. A fire. A cold, burning fury. He hesitated, then went to the attic and retrieved the laptop. He brought it down, set it on the kitchen table, and played the video. Leo_last_day.mp for single quotes. He watched his wife watch the last moments of their son's free life. He saw her flinch when the man's voice spoke. He saw her hands clench into tight, white-knuckled fists. He saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek as she heard Leo's laughter, but her expression remained a mask of cold, controlled rage. She watched it all the way to the end, to the chilling, whispered boast. "He's gone." When it was over, she closed the laptop with a quiet, deliberate click. "You're going to meet this man, this Kendrick," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you think he's going to give you a name?" "I think he's going to use me to hurt the man who fired him," Daniel said, "and I'm going to let him." She nodded slowly. Then she stood up, walked to the phone on the kitchen wall, and picked up the receiver. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked, a cold dread seeping into his veins. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm telling them everything. About the video, about your brother, about Aegis." "No." Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Chloe, you can't. Michael said they have connections everywhere. They'll bury it, they'll make the hard drive disappear. This is our only chance. Kendrick is our only way in." "Our chance for what, Daniel?" she said, her voice rising, the icy calm finally cracking. "For vigilante justice. For you to get yourself killed playing spy games in some abandoned warehouse. Leo is gone. Don't you understand that? All this crusade, it's not going to bring him back. This is not about bringing him back," he yelled, his own control snapping. "This is about justice. It's about the man who stole him from us. He is still out there. He's walking around, he's breathing, he's living his life, while our son is wherever he is. We can't let him get away with it. We can't. I can't lose you too," she whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of her, her face crumpling in on itself. The tears came, then, hot and furious. "I can't. I survived losing Leo. I will not survive losing you. I am going to call the police, and they will handle it, and you will be safe." It was a betrayal, born not of malice, but of love. A desperate, terrified act to protect what little she had left. But it was a betrayal nonetheless. She saw him as a man on a suicidal quest for vengeance. She didn't see that he was already dead. The man he used to be had died 13 years ago with his son. This new man, this avatar of rage, had only one purpose: he could not, would not, be stopped. He lunged for the phone, grabbing it from her hand. She cried out, struggling against him. It was a clumsy, desperate tussle in the heart of their silent, grieving home. It was ugly and raw and full of 13 years of unspoken pain. "You don't understand." "Chloe," he grunted, holding her back as he slammed the phone down, breaking the connection. "This is the only way." "No," she sobbed, beating her fists against his chest. "I won't let you. I won't." And then, a sound from the front of the house made them both freeze. The sound of a key in the lock. But they were the only ones with a key. The front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Two men, large and imposing, dressed in dark tactical gear, stepped into the kitchen. They moved with a fluid, professional menace. They were not police officers. They were soldiers. Finch's soldiers. The machine. One of the men had a taser in his hand. The other held a small black bag. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their eyes, cold and empty, said everything. The black sedan outside had not just been watching, it had been waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the conflict to reach its peak. Their fight, their raw emotional explosion, had been the signal. The man with the taser raised the weapon. "Don't make this difficult," he said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. Daniel's blood ran cold. Michael's warning echoed in his ears. They will come after Chloe. He had been so focused on his own quest, on his own rage, that he had led the wolf right to his door. He had endangered the one person he had left to live for. The humiliation of his failure was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own righteous fury, and all he had done was make them play their hand. The man with the bag stepped towards the table where the laptop sat, the hard drive beside it. He was here for the key. He was here to erase the past. Daniel reacted on pure instinct. It wasn't bravery. It was the desperate primal fury of a cornered animal. With a guttural roar, he shoved Chloe behind him and lunged, not at the men, but at the table. He grabbed the hard drive and the laptop, and hurled them with all his strength towards the large picture window that looked out onto their backyard. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the arc of the electronics through the air. He saw the shocked expression on the faces of the two men. He saw Chloe's eyes, wide with terror. He heard the magnificent, shattering symphony of the window exploding outwards, glass flying into the night. The laptop and the hard drive tumbled onto the damp grass of the backyard, which sloped down towards the dark, dense woods that bordered their property. It was a desperate, insane gamble, a final defiant act. He couldn't let them have it. He couldn't let them win, not this easily. The man with the taser fired. The two barbs hit Daniel square in the chest. An agonizing electric fire tore through every nerve in his body. His muscles seized, his vision exploded into a starburst of white light, and he collapsed to the floor, his body twitching uncontrollably. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was one of the men running out the back door, towards the shattered window, and the other man stepping towards Chloe, who was screaming his name. The injustice was no longer a secret. It was in his home. It was brutal and merciless, and it was just getting started. The plot twist didn't come from a dusty archive or a hidden safe. It came from a place of unimaginable horror. It came from the ghost himself. The clue wasn't a diary or a voicemail. It was a living, breathing testament to Alistair Finch's depravity. It was Leo. When Daniel woke, it was to the smell of antiseptic and the low, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The electric agony of the taser had been replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in his chest and a thick, syrupy fog in his head. He was in a hospital bed. Chloe was asleep in a chair beside him, her face tear-streaked and pale, her hand clutching his. The sight of her, safe, sent a wave of relief through him, so powerful it almost made him pass out again. A police officer, young and earnest-looking, was standing at the foot of his bed. He explained what had happened, in the dry, procedural language of a police report. A home invasion. 2 assailants, unidentified. Mrs. Miller had been sedated, but was otherwise unharmed. Mr. Miller had suffered a cardiac event from the taser, and had been brought to the hospital. The intruders had ransacked the house, apparently looking for valuables. They had fled through the broken rear window. The police had searched the backyard and the adjacent woods. They found the laptop, smashed to pieces. The hard drive, however, was gone. It was a perfect narrative, clean, plausible, a random act of urban violence. Daniel knew it was a lie. Finch's men hadn't been clumsy. They hadn't been scared off. They had gotten what they came for. The key was gone. The evidence was lost. He had failed. The weight of his defeat was a physical thing, pressing him down into the thin hospital mattress. He spent 2 days in the hospital, his mind a slow, muddy river of despair. Chloe stayed by his side, her earlier anger replaced by a quiet, fierce protectiveness. They didn't talk about the video. They didn't talk about Aegis. They didn't have to. The truth was now a living entity in their marriage, a third person in the room. On the 3rd day, Michael showed up. He looked even worse than he had in the diner. His face was gaunt. His eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and terror. He waited until Chloe had gone down to the cafeteria to get coffee. "They know, Daniel," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Finch knows I talked to you. He called me into his office. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me, he knows. I'm a dead man. They have the drive, Michael," Daniel said, his own voice flat and lifeless. "It's over." "No," Michael said, shaking his head. He leaned closer, his eyes wild. "No, it's not. I did something. After I left you at the diner, I knew they'd be coming. I knew Finch would want to sanitize everything, so I made a copy." Daniel stared at him. "A copy of what?" "Everything," Michael whispered. "I went to the Aegis servers. I used my executive access. I pulled every file that had Kendrick's operational signature on it from 2011. Every report, every communication, every piece of surveillance. I was looking for the ghost's name, for anything that could help you, and I found it. Oh God, Daniel, I found it." Michael was sweating, his hands shaking as he pulled a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket. It was no bigger than his thumb. "It's all on here. The operative's name is Julian Croft, XMI6, a specialist in extractions, a psychopath. But that's not the worst of it. The client wasn't some corporation or foreign government. The client was a family, the Blackwoods." Daniel knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. The Blackwoods were old money, a dynasty that had built its fortune on railroads and steel a century ago. They were reclusive, powerful, and untouchable, living in a massive fortified estate on the far side of the lake. "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why the Blackwoods?" "Their son," Michael said, his voice cracking. "Their only son, Thomas. He was 16 at the time. He had a rare, aggressive form of leukemia. He'd relapsed after multiple rounds of chemo and a bone marrow transplant. The doctors had given him months to live. They were desperate." "What does that have to do with Leo?" Daniel asked, a cold, sickening dread beginning to pool in his stomach. The pieces were starting to connect in his mind, forming a picture of such monstrous, unthinkable evil that his brain refused to accept it. "They didn't just want a donor, Daniel," Michael said, his eyes welling with tears. "They wanted a replacement. The Blackwoods were obsessed with lineage, with bloodlines. They couldn't accept that their line was going to end, so they hired Finch, and Finch hired Croft. They weren't looking for a bone marrow match, they were looking for a child. Healthy 7-year-old boy with a specific genetic profile. A boy who could be re-educated, reshaped, and who could, when the time came, inherit the Blackwood name and fortune." The world tilted on its axis. The air in the hospital room seemed too thin to turn to ice. It wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. It wasn't a murder to silence a witness. It was a theft. A theft of a life. A theft of a son. They hadn't killed Leo, they had stolen him. He's alive, Daniel breathed. The words escaping his lips, like a prayer and a curse. Yes, Michael said, tears now streaming down his face. He's alive. He's been living at the Blackwood estate for 13 years. They faked their own son's death a year after they took Leo. A tragic, private burial. And they raised Leo as their own. As Thomas Blackwood, the full, horrifying scope of the conspiracy crashed down on Daniel with the force of a physical blow. It was diabolical. It was perfect. A grieving, powerful family, a secret, untraceable adoption, a new life for a boy who had no memory of his past. They hadn't just stolen his son, they had erased him. They had murdered Daniel's Leo and replaced him with their Thomas. The flash drive, Daniel said, his voice a raw, choked sound. He reached out a trembling hand. Give it to me. Michael handed it to him. The small piece of plastic and metal felt impossibly heavy. It was a bomb. Croft is still on their payroll, Michael said, his voice a frantic whisper. He's their head of security at the estate. He's the one who's been watching Leo all these years. He's the gatekeeper. And Finch is the architect. This is his masterpiece of plausible deniability. It's what he built his company on. He proved to the most powerful people in the world that he could do the impossible. That he could solve any problem, no matter how monstrous. The Blackwood account made Aegis what it is today. This was the plot twist. This was the hidden clue. It wasn't just about a grieving father's quest for vengeance anymore. It was about a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of the city's elite. It was about a corporation built on a foundation of stolen children. The stakes had just escalated from a personal tragedy to a public scandal of unimaginable proportions. You have to get out of here, Daniel said, his mind racing, the fog of despair replaced by a surge of pure crystalline adrenaline. Finch knows you betrayed him. He'll be coming for you next. Disappear, Michael, run. I'm not running anymore, Michael said, a strange calm settling over him. He stood up, squaring his shoulders. I'm going to my office. I'm going to wipe my computer. And then I'm going to walk out. Let them come. I made my choice. This is my atonement. He looked at his brother, at the man he had betrayed. And for the first time in 13 years, the guilt in his eyes was replaced by a look of grim, resolute peace. His name is Leo Daniel, not Thomas. His name is Leo. Go get your son. Michael turned and walked out of the room, a dead man walking. Daniel knew he would never see his brother again. He was a loose end, and Finch's machine was ruthlessly efficient at tying them up. Michael's final act was not one of cowardice, but one of sacrifice. He had handed Daniel the weapon, and now he was walking into the line of fire to buy him time. The tension in the room was a living thing. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to be counting down to an explosion. Daniel looked at the flash drive in his hand. He had the truth. The whole monstrous, unbelievable truth. He had the names, he had the motive, he had the location. He had everything he needed to expose Alistair Finch and the Blackwoods, to tear their corrupt world down to its foundations. But he didn't just want to expose them. He didn't just want a public scandal. He wanted something more. He wanted a reckoning. He wanted to stand in front of the man with the predatory smile, the monster who had haunted his nightmares for 13 years, and he wanted to see the fear in his eyes. And more than anything in the world, more than justice, more than revenge, he wanted to see his son. He had to know. Was there anything left of the boy who loved chocolate chip cookies and stories about space? Was there any flicker of Leo left in the eyes of the young man they called Thomas Blackwood? The question was a fire in his soul. He ripped the four from his arm, ignoring the sharp sting of pain. He swung his legs out of the bed, his body weak but his will forged into something unbreakable. He had the key. He had the map. The full horrifying conspiracy was laid bare. And now, he was going to walk into the monster's cage. Not to fight it, but to reclaim what was his. The stakes were no longer just life and death. They were about the reclamation of a soul. And the cinematic payoff was going to be an earthquake. The Cinematic payoff was not a courtroom bombshell or a public arrest. It was a siege. A quiet, methodical one-man siege on the fortress of a king. Daniel, armed with the flash drive and a fury that had been tempered into a diamond-hard resolve, did not go to the press. He did not go to the police. He went to the one man who had as much to lose as Alistair Finch, and who hated him just as much. Arthur Kendrick. He met the old spymaster not in a derelict warehouse, but in the hushed, wood-paneled reading room of a private library, a place Kendrick owned through a shell corporation. The old man was exactly as his voice had sounded, dry, brittle, and radiating a dangerous, coiled energy. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and listened as Daniel laid out the entire story, from the video to the flash drive to the monstrous truth about the Blackwoods. Kendrick listened without interruption, his reptilian eyes never leaving Daniel's face. When Daniel was finished, the old man took a slow sip of his drink. Finch was always an artist of ambition, he said, his voice a low rasp. But this is his Sistine Chapel of depravity. To steal a man's son and sell him as a replacement, it's breathtaking. I don't want a scandal, Daniel said, his voice low and intense. A scandal can be managed. Finch is an expert at managing scandals. I want to burn his world to the ground. I want to take back my son, and I want you to help me. Kendrick smiled, a thin, bloodless crack in his wrinkled face. You assume I have the resources to go to war with Aegis. I assume you have the desire, Daniel corrected him. Finch cast you out. He took your life's work and threw you away like a piece of trash. You've been waiting for a weapon. My brother gave me one, and I'm handing it to you. Daniel slid the flash drive across the polished table. Everything is on there. The operational files, the client agreement with the Blackwoods, the payments to the operative, Julian Croft. It's the bullet. I just need you to provide the gun. Kendrick picked up the flash drive and held it between his thumb and forefinger, examining it as if it were a rare jewel. A gun is a noisy, messy thing, he mused. I prefer a scalpel, something quiet, precise, that cuts out the heart of the matter, without the patient even knowing they're bleeding. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes gleaming with a cold, intellectual fire. You want your son back. I want to destroy Alistair Finch. I believe our interests are aligned. The plan Kendrick devised was not one of brute force, but of psychological warfare. It was elegant, cruel, and perfectly tailored to his targets. It had 3 phases. Phase 1 was for Julian Croft, the ghost. Phase 2 was for the Blackwoods, the clients, and Phase 3, the grand finale, was for Alistair Finch, the architect. Phase 1 began a week later. Julian Croft lived on the Blackwood estate, in a state-of-the-art security cottage, a loyal dog guarding his masters. Kendrick, using his old networks, began to dismantle Croft's life from the outside in. His offshore bank accounts were frozen by a series of anonymous, algorithm-driven compliance flags. His digital communications were subtly corrupted, emails failing to send, calls dropping. A package containing a single, pristine 7.62mm bullet, preferred caliber from his MI6 days was delivered to his cottage, with no note. Small things. Psychological pricks designed to unnerve a man who prided himself on control and anonymity. Then came the centerpiece of the attack. Kendrick had a deepfake audio file created. It was a conversation, perfectly mimicking the voices of Alistair Finch and the elder Mr. Blackwood. In the recording, the 2 men discussed the Croft liability. They spoke of his increasing instability, his drinking, the risk he posed. Now that the asset was turning 20, they concluded that Croft was a loose end that needed to be retired. The recording was anonymously uploaded to a secure voice server, and a link was sent to Croft's burner phone. Don Daniel could only imagine the scene. The predator, the man with the confident, chilling smile, sitting alone in his sterile cottage, listening to his masters calmly plotting his execution. The hunter was now the hunted. Kendrick's scalpel had found its mark. Phase 2 targeted the Blackwoods. Their obsession was legacy, bloodline, the purity of their name. So Kendrick attacked the very concept of that legacy. He hired a team of forensic genealogists to create a meticulously researched and utterly fraudulent family history for the Blackwoods. It was a masterpiece of forgery, complete with faked birth certificates, doctored photographs, and falsified immigration records dating back to the 19th century. The new history revealed that the great Blackwood patriarch, the source of their name and fortune, was not the Anglo-Saxon industrialist they revered, but a petty criminal of mixed heritage who had stolen the identity of a dead man. The entire foundation of their proud lineage was a lie. This document was not leaked to the press. It was delivered, leather-bound and gold-leafed, directly to Mr. Blackwood, with a simple, unsigned note. History is always written by the victors. Are you sure you've won? The psychological poison was potent. Every time he looked at his son, this boy he had stolen to carry on his name, he would be reminded that the name itself was a fraud. The fortress of his pride had been breached. The final phase, the checkmate, was reserved for Alistair Finch. It was scheduled for the night of the annual Aegis Gala, a lavish black tie event held at the city's most prestigious museum, a celebration of the company's power and success. It was Finch's coronation ball. Kendrick had arranged for Daniel to be there. Not as a guest, but as part of the catering staff. Dressed in a crisp white jacket and black bow tie, Daniel moved through the glittering crowds, his heart pounding a steady rhythmic drumbeat of anticipation. He saw Finch on a dais, holding a glass of champagne, accepting the adulation of the city's most powerful people. He looked invincible, a king on his throne. Daniel's job was simple. He was to wait for the signal. At precisely 10 p.m., during Finch's keynote address, Kendrick would make his move. He wasn't going to leak the flash drive to the world. He was going to leak it to one person, Julian Croft. At 9:55 p.m. Holed up in his cottage, paranoid and terrified, convinced his employers were about to kill him, Croft received another anonymous message. This one contained the entire contents of the flash drive, the operational files, the surveillance reports. But most importantly, it contained the unedited video from Daniel's hard drive. The video of Croft himself, talking to Daniel, his voice calm and friendly as he orchestrated the theft of a child. And the message attached to the file read, Finch kept a copy. He was holding this over you from the beginning. He was never going to let you walk away. This is his insurance policy. Now, it's yours. It was the final, brilliant twist of the knife. Kendrick had framed Finch. He had made it look like Finch was the one who had betrayed Croft, who had kept the one piece of evidence that could send him to prison for life. He had given a cornered, paranoid killer a target for his rage. At 10 p.m., as Alistair Finch stood at the podium, basking in the applause, his face projected onto giant screens throughout the museum, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his head of security. It read, Croft is OF'lish. He's coming for you. Finch's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed his face. And then, Daniel, standing by the edge of the room, saw him. Julian Croft. He had bypassed security with the ease of a phantom. He wasn't wearing a uniform or tactical gear. He was dressed in a dark, tailored suit, looking like any other guest, but his eyes were filled with a terrifying homicidal rage. And he was walking, calmly and deliberately, towards the dais. Towards Alistair Finch. Panic erupted. Finch's security detail, seeing Croft, drew their weapons. The guests screamed, a wave of terror washing over the opulent ballroom. But Croft was a ghost. He moved through the chaos with a liquid grace, a blur of motion. Finch, his face a mask of pure terror, tried to run. Daniel didn't stay to watch. The end. That was Kendrick's victory. His victory was waiting for him outside. As chaos consumed the gala, Daniel slipped out a side exit. A black car, one of Kendrick's, was waiting for him. The driver handed him a phone. On the screen was a map, a blinking red dot, showing Croft's movements, tracked via his own phone. But there was another blinking dot, a blue one, labeled Asset. It was on the move, away from the Blackwood estate. While Finch's world was imploding, a second team, dispatched by Kendrick, had breached the Blackwood estate. They didn't go in with guns, they went in with the truth. They presented the fraudulent genealogy to the Blackwoods, and as the family reeled from the psychological blow, the team executed the final step. They found the boy, the young man known as Thomas Blackwood, and they showed him the video. The video of a 7-year-old boy named Leo, laughing on a swing set. The car carrying Daniel sped through the night, towards a predetermined meeting point. A quiet, deserted pier on the edge of the lake. When they arrived, another car was already there, its engine idling. The back door opened, and he stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the same wheat-colored hair, now cut short and neat. He was wearing the clothes of a rich kid, an expensive jacket, tailored jeans. He looked nothing and everything like the 7-year-old boy on the swings. He looked lost, confused, shattered. He looked at Daniel, who was standing by the water's edge, his heart threatening to beat its way out of his chest. The young man's face was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. 13 years of lies were crashing down on him. His entire identity had been a fabrication. The people he thought were his parents were his captors. The man who had been his guardian, his protector, Croft, was a monster. He took a tentative step towards Daniel, then another. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes, the same impossible bottomless blue, searching Daniel's face. "Dad." The word was a whisper, a question, a prayer. It was the voice of a stranger, deeper, rougher, but the word was everything. It was the ghost, finally coming home. Daniel couldn't speak. He could only nod, tears streaming down his face, washing away 13 years of grief, of rage, of emptiness. He opened his arms, and his son, his long-lost stolen, and finally returned son, stepped into them. The cinematic payoff wasn't the explosion of a scandal or the death of a villain. It was this: a quiet, world-shattering embrace on a deserted pier, under the silent, watching stars. A father and a son, two broken halves of a single soul, finally made whole. The aftermath was not a clean, neat healing. It was a slow, painful, and profoundly complicated sunrise. The world had not been cleansed, only rearranged. Alistair Finch did not die at the gala. Julian Croft, in a final bloody act of vengeance, had put 2 bullets in Finch's chest before being gunned down by the Aegis security team. Finch survived, but he was a king without a kingdom. He was paralyzed from the waist down, a broken man in a gilded wheelchair. The flash drive, released by Kendrick to select media outlets in the chaotic aftermath, had exposed the Blackwood conspiracy. Aegis was shattered by lawsuits and federal investigations. The Blackwoods, disgraced and ruined, vanished into the obscurity of their own fraudulent history. Justice, in its own brutal and messy way, had been served. But for Daniel, for Chloe, and for Leo, the legal and financial fallout was just noise. Their aftermath was quieter, more intimate, and infinitely more challenging. Bringing a ghost home is not a simple thing. Leo, who had spent more than 2/3 of his life as Thomas Blackwood, was a stranger in his own past. He was a young man wrestling with a fractured identity. His mind a battleground of competing memories, competing loyalties, competing selves. He remembered fragments of his first 7 years, the taste of his mother's pancakes, the feel of his father's hand, the melody of a lullaby, but they were like faded photographs from someone else's album. His life as Thomas, as sterile and false as it was, had been his reality. The grief he had to process was not just for his stolen childhood, but for the life he had been forced to leave behind. However fraudulent it may have been, they sold the old house, the museum of what-ifs. It was too heavy with the ghosts of the past. They moved to a small, quiet town on the coast, a place with no history for any of them. They bought a house with large windows that let in the sea air and the sound of the waves. It was a neutral ground, a place where they could begin to build something new. Daniel went back to architecture. He started his own small firm, designing simple, elegant homes filled with light. He found solace in creating things again, in building foundations that were strong and true. He had spent 13 years as a custodian of emptiness. Now, he was an architect of hope. Chloe, who had encased her grief in a shell of frantic activity, found a new, quieter purpose. She quit her committees and her fundraisers. She started a small community garden, finding a slow, methodical peace in the act of nurturing things, of coaxing life from the soil. She and Leo would spend hours there, together, not always talking, just working side by side. Their shared silence, a comfortable, healing thing. She was no longer a mother grieving a lost child. She was a mother getting to know a son she had never thought she would see again. There were hard days. Days when Leo would retreat into a silent, moody despair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had been done to him. Days when the chasm of 13 lost years seemed too wide to ever bridge. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of frustration and pain. The scars of their trauma were deep and jagged. One cool autumn evening, a year after they had moved, Daniel found Leo sitting on the beach, staring out at the ocean. He sat down beside him on the sand. For a long time, they just watched the waves roll in a steady, eternal rhythm. "I found this when we were packing up the old house," Leo said, his voice quiet. He pulled something from his pocket. It was a small, smooth gray stone, a perfect skipping stone. Daniel recognized it instantly. It was from the collection Leo had kept in a shoebox under his bed. "Your lucky stone," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember looking for it," Leo said, turning the stone over and over in his hand. "At the park that day, I had it in my pocket, and then I couldn't find it. I think I dropped it when he took me." Looked at Daniel, his blue eyes clear and steady in the fading light. "It feels like I've been looking for it ever since." He drew his arm back and, with a flick of his wrist, sent the stone skipping across the surface of the water. It bounced once, twice, 3, 4 times, leaving a trail of widening ripples, before finally sinking into the depths. "You don't have to look anymore," Daniel said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. "You're home." The aftermath was not an ending. It was a beginning. A difficult, beautiful, and profoundly human beginning. The cost of the truth had been immense. It had cost Michael his life. It had cost Daniel and Chloe 13 years of their own. It had cost Leo his childhood. But in the quiet, bittersweet healing, they found something that had been lost for even longer than a son. They found a future. And as they sat together on the beach, watching the last light of the day fade from the sky, the lingering emotional echo was not one of haunting tragedy, but of quiet, resilient, and hard-won peace. The ghost was finally at rest. The man was home.